Hello, this is Tracy Mars with Remax, and we are coming to you live this morning from my kitchen. We are going to talk a little bit about what's going on right now, because unless you've been underneath a rock and you've been hearing all the stuff that's been going on with media noise, real estate's always a little bit wild and crazy, and right now it's a little bit more feral than normal. People are concerned, people are worried, and I'm here to try to help resolve this a little bit, because it's not as bad as it sounds, I promise. When I first got licensed in real estate over 19 years ago, I would have a lot of these older realtors tell me, well, Tracy, you have to list last. And I'd be like, well, why? Because, back then, 60s, 70s, 80s even, someone would, Mr. and Ms. Seller would talk to a realtor and they'd sign a contract and that realtor would put a sign in the yard. And you're like, okay, well, that's not any different than right now. No, it's not. But how things were sold were a little bit different. Because back then, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer would be driving around town, see a cute little house alongside the road, and instead of calling their realtor, their buyer's representation, they would call the seller's agent and her team that was on the sign. And when they would do that, they would show the home and then they'd write up an offer with that agent and our team. Well, some people would have their own buyer's representation. We were going to put Lucky down. And then as people would have it, people would talk. And as people would talk, they would realize that people who had their own buyer's representation oftentimes were happier or had more protection, or they were just, at the end of the day, they were happier. They had inspections, they had all this other stuff going on. And the people who did not were concerned. They were upset. They were worried. And people would be like, well, everyone has the right to hire their own representation. Because even then, people had the right to hire their own representation. Sellers, had the right to hire whatever realtor they want to. Buyers had the right to hire their own representation as they chose to. Having the right is not the same as having the ability. Not everybody had the ability to have their own buyer's representation, as they didn't have the affordability factor of it. And then that's why they would talk to attorneys. And these attorneys said, you know what, you're right. This is not a level playing field. This is unfair. So they filed lawsuits. And these lawsuits were agreed that you're right. This is not a level playing field for buyers and sellers. So commissions were wrapped up into the purchase price of the home. And for the last about 15 so years, my association that I was very proud of was encouraging more buyers to use their own buyer's representation. The sellers were having representation, buyers were having representation, and it was a level playing field. Both sides had, people who were filling out the forms for them and protecting them, licensed individuals who were doing the job that is needed that give everybody their own representation in a legal contract. Because these are legal contracts. These are legal forms. When I first got licensed, like I said, I would still get phone calls a lot about this. And so we started teaching home buyer and home seller education classes so that people had that education of what each agent does and what the paperwork means and the process and the steps. Education is very important, which is why we're here doing this video. What is changing? Commissions are not really changing. Buyer commission is, as it always has been, negotiable. That has never changed. Commission has always been negotiable. It will always be negotiable. If you go to work every day, you are not allowed to talk to your coworkers about your pay or your bonuses or anything like that. As realtors, we do not talk about commissions. There is no set commissions. We don't talk about commissions, well, who's doing this or who's doing that, because to do a set commission would be a violation of an antitrust law. We don't do that. When a home is listed on the market, I never know what the seller's agent and the sellers have commissioned agreed upon. I don't know. We don't know because, again, that's private. It's nothing set. The media is talking about how this is breaking the realtor monopoly. There's no monopoly here, guys. We are 1099 self-independent contractors working underneath the brokerage where we hang our licenses at and part of the associations to which we are members. 1099 self-independent contractors. Hiring a realtor is like talking to a couple of roofers or plumbers when you need work done. You ask questions. What does the services entail? How much is it going to cost? Is there, if I do this, would it be this? And then you hire the person you feel is going to do the best job for you based on skills, experience, knowledge. Fair. That's the way it has been. That's the way it's always going to be. Now, What does change? Paperwork. Our listing paperwork will change. Our buyer purchase paperwork will change. And as of January 1st of this year, buyers who are hiring buyer representation will have to fill out a buyer agency representation form. We legally cannot represent a buyer without that form being signed. What doesn't change? Well, again, we'll see how this works out, because again, nothing's been decided yet, but let's talk about how agency actually works, because I am getting phone calls from buyers who are looking to buy later this year when their leases come up, and they're worried and they're concerned, like, Tracy, we can't afford this. You know, we're first-time home buyers. We're using down payment assistance programs. We're going to need seller closing cost assistance. I don't have money. We have earnest money, and we have inspection fees, and we have, you know, money for our appraisal, but we don't have money for anything else. What are we going to do? They're worried. And I'm here to try to ease everybody's concerns. Because while the media says this is going to save billions of dollars, I don't really see that. It's kind of a case when you're a mom, right? And somebody does one of your kids do something wrong, and instead of taking responsibility, they're like, Mom, it wasn't me. It was my brother. It was my sister. It's that kid down the street. It's the bully at school. It's the realtors. It's kind of a situation like that. These are guys, you know, with a lot of money making decisions that is going to negatively affect a lot of different people. First-time home buyers, VA buyers, some people who are already struggling. You know who's happy about this? Builders, investors, and those who like to do dual agency. So when Mr. and Mrs. Seller are selling their home, they're going to talk to a realtor. Right? There. And they're going to hopefully talk to more than one realtor, because they should talk to more than one realtor. And they're going to ask questions. What's your commission set up? I know realtors who charge X, realtors who charge Y, realtors who do tier, hey, for this service, gold, bronze, silver services. Again, nothing is set. So in this case, Mr. and Ms. Seller talked to a couple of different realtors, and they decided to negotiate a commission. Maybe it's a percentage, maybe it's a flat fee. Remember, commissions always has been and still is negotiable. And they decide to do a seller agent commission, which is known as an SAC, and let's say it is at 5%. Now this just be just as easy as 4%, 4.5%, 6%, a flat fee, we don't know. And let's say as Mr., the realtor in this case says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, one of my jobs for you as your agent is to get your home into as many, buyers' hands as possible. This is how much I think your home is worth based off the comparables that we have. This is how much I think you're going to be able to net. This is, what I think who's going to buy your home, who we're going to market to, and how we're going to market to your home. Now, there's a lot more to it. Sometimes we're helping people get ready. And here's contractors. I'm hiring a landscaper right now for one of my listings because the yard needs to be cleaned up. There's a lot more to it that we're doing. But this is kind of, at this point, just the basics. Again, we all do our business separately. This is why you ask questions. All right, and they're saying one of the things that I want to do, this is why my commission is 5%, is I'm going to offer the buyer's agent a BAC. And this could be split. Maybe it's 2.75, 2.25, 2.5, 2.5, 3%, 2%, who knows? In this case, we're going to say that they're going to do a 2.5% and a 2.5%. And the reason why we're going to do this is because I know in your price range for your home, we're going to have a lot of buyers who are going to need a little bit more help. And if we're doing this, we're encouraging those buyers to come and look at your home because it's less fees for them up front. Now, this has been disclosed on the MLS, and that came about because of transparency. We want to be transparent on how people are being paid as realtors. Okay, while we never know what the seller agent and the sellers have negotiated as a commission, we don't know. That has never been transparent. It has always been transparent on the MLS of what this is going to be. What the new law is proposing is removing that from the buyer's agent commission on the MLS. Does that mean the buyer's agent commission has gone away? It does not. What it means is it's not being disclosed on the MLS. That does not mean that it's not there. It could be on the disclosures. It could be on the flyers. It could be on a lot of different things. And I can also call the seller's agent and say, hey, my buyer just sent me this home. Are you offering a buyer agent commission? It's still there. It's just not on the MLS anymore. That is the only thing that this is proposing. They're not taking it away. They're just saying it's not on the MLS anymore. All right. So we have two different agents here, the seller's agent, the buyer's agent. Okay. Seller's agent, as we've discussed, what they do and how they're working for the seller. Their job is to the seller. Their job is to be loyal to the seller. And let's say Mr. and Mrs. Seller have decided that they don't want to offer a BAC, and let's say they're offering 3% to their realtor. And this could be, again, 2%, 2.5%, a flat fee. This is just for example. Commissions are, as they always have been, negotiable. That has not changed, my friends. But in this case, this agent came in and said, yeah, guys, you know what? I know that agent's saying 5%. I will do it for 3%. And the seller said, great, that's cheaper. I want to do that. All right. So what happens here? Right. If you are a buyer and we are filling out a buyer's agency agreement, which is now required, we're going to have a couple discussions. One, what is the term of this contract? Two, is this a non-exclusive or an exclusive contract? And this is very important for you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, to know, because one means that if you terminate the contract, you could incur damages. The other one means that if you terminate the buyer's agency representation contract, you should not incur damages. Very important. You need to ask those questions. We will do a video on that later. All right. One of the other things that's going to show up in that buyer agency representation is whether or not you agree to a limited dual agency. If you do not have to sign or initial that portion. All right. This is going to be very important for you. The next portion of it is going to talk about the commission. Because again, if as a realtor, I'm 1099 self-independent contractor, this is how I get paid. You go to your job every day, you get paid weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, however. I do not. I only get paid if keys get exchanged. If keys don't get exchanged, I don't get paid. I can work with someone for 6 months, a year, and if they never buy a home or the home doesn't sell, I don't get paid. If I have a listing, and every time I put a listing on the market, it costs me money because I'm doing photos, cleaning, I'm getting this home ready, we got flyers. And if that home doesn't sell, I don't get reimbursed for that. Now, some agents might. Again, that's all negotiable as part of a contract. Okay, again, that's all negotiable. Everything here is being negotiable. So we're putting money up front. Now, again, for a buyer, same thing. Drive around, look at homes. I've got a client who's been looking at home for 6 months. That's okay. My job is to help them find the best home I can in the price range for which they are looking at. Okay. When we do have an offer signed around, we're walking through making the offer, writing the offer, sending it over to the seller's agent. We're going to be there for the home inspection. We're with them in the home inspection, talking to the inspector. What needs to be repaired? What doesn't need to be repaired? What are you okay with? What are you not okay with? Sending that form over to the seller's agent. We're going to be through the whole process. This is what this paperwork means. This is the next step. What most people don't realize is there's 20 people involved in the purchase and sale of a home. And you are only going to talk to 4 of those people. And you might hear about 2 of those people, or you will hear 2 about those people, but the rest of those people are just nameless cogs that are in the process of transfer of property. All realtors are licensed to do the same thing. We are licensed to help people with the paperwork and the process and steps involved in the transfer of ownership from a seller to a buyer. It's how we do it, our skills, knowledge, and experience, that what makes us different. Which is why when you interview agents, you ask questions. One of the other things that, again, as we're talking about on this buyer's agency representation form, does talk about commission. Because anytime I put my name on an offer or on a listing, I'm taking legal responsibility for this paperwork. Okay, so there's a legal liability that's involved in here. And I need to be compensated, of course, for this time. Now, we don't make as much money as you think we do. Because when you get paid, you have gross versus net, right? Don't look at the gross, you only look at the net, because it's gross how much you don't get. Same thing in real estate. Except for real estate, we actually, when we get paid, we don't get paid from our company. We pay them for the privilege of hanging our license there. So regardless if I sell a house this month or not, I'm still paying the company my license is hung with a fee every month. For every time I do get paid, there's franchise fees, transaction fees, attorney fees, and air and emission taxes. Okay, and when I get paid, I still have to pay taxes, and I pay double taxes because I'm self-employed, and then health insurance and marketing costs and all these other costs that have to come out of that. And then we get what's left. And it's not as much as I'd like to think. Gross versus net, right? Always gross how much you don't get. Same thing with real estate. So when we're talking to our buyers and say, look, this is our minimum commission. Let's say that we have a minimum commission of 2% or a minimum commission of this dollar amount that we need to be paid. And then so in this case, we'd look at our buyers and say, one, do you want to look at any home that is not offering a buyer agent commission? Okay. So just because this is not on the RMLS, again, means it could be on the disclosures, it could be on the flyers. I'm going to call and ask. If that agent still wants to look at that home, I'm still going to show them this home because that is my legal requirement. And if they want to buy this home, then we will make the offer asking for that BAC to be paid. Okay. And if they choose not to, they can still come back. Seller says, no, we don't want to. At that point, I have to look at my sellers and say, you have options. Your options are, of course, that you can pay me the fee. And again, remember for a VA buyer, they cannot. VA does not allow a VA buyer to pay for buyer representation. It has to be wrapped into the contract or not at all. Okay. Or for a lot of buyers where affordability is an issue, they won't be able to do that. So in that case, they're going to say, Tracy, I don't want to look at a home, any home that's not offering a buyer agent commission, or they're going to have to be talking to the seller's agent. Okay, those are their options here. Hey, yes, we can help you. We're going to pay you for your time and efforts. We value you. And this happens, sometimes this does happen. People see the value in having their own representation. But a lot of times this won't be able to happen. So these buyers have to make the decision whether they want to get involved in a dual agency or transaction brokerage, or they don't want to look at these homes at all. When the short sale crisis was happening, I literally had buyers tell me, Tracy, do not show me any homes that's a short sale. That can, and in some cases, is going to happen here. So for these sellers, they may have lost a pool of buyers. Just something to be considering of. So for the buyer who still wants to go forward with this, even though there is no commission being offered here, they would have to call the seller's agent. And this means that this agent or team becomes a dual agency. So a dual agency is someone who, or team, that is representing both the seller and the buyer on the same transaction. Now, you can't serve two masters. We know that, right? It didn't work for Anakin Skywalker. It's not going to work for the rest of us either. All right. So in this case, it's not really a dual agency, it's a transaction brokerage. And if they are a transaction brokerage, they are no longer loyal to the seller or to the buyer, they're loyal to the transaction, meaning they're just here to fill out paperwork, to make sure all paperwork is legal and binding and protecting, well, not even protecting both sides. So if you're doing a buyer in this situation and you're doing the home inspector and you're at the home inspection, you can't be in that home with the home inspector by themselves. A licensed agent has to be with you. So in this case, since you don't have your own representation, the seller's agent would be at the home inspection with you. When you're doing a home inspection, the seller never gets a copy of the home inspection. It's paid for by the buyer and owned by the buyer. In this case, now the seller's agent's with you. There is a loss of representation as you see here. And in this case, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, or the seller's agent might say, hey, we're getting an SAC here, but Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, because our name's now on this, you can do this either as a transaction. I'm going to have to charge you a transaction fee. And this could be a transaction fee of, again, negotiable. Maybe it's $500. Maybe it's $2,000. Maybe it's $3,000. Maybe it's $1,500. I don't know. But they can charge a fee because remember paperwork, let's say it's $1,000. So you're still paying some sort of fee here, but without the representation. So that is something that I've heard some agents say that they're going to be doing when they're in a transaction. Or you're an unrepresented buyer. And an unrepresented buyer is where the agent says, I represent the seller in the side. You, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are an unrepresented buyer. You do not have your own buyer representation. You're an unrepresented buyer. I am going to have to charge you a fee to fill out these papers and these forms for you. But I cannot advise you as I work with the seller. All right. So what about if you're the seller? Well, you are selling your home. But now you've sold your home. Someone's gotten keys. Congratulations. Now you're the buyer. And we just talked about the buyer side. So there's still a buyer agency form. We're going to have these same conversations. Do you want to look at homes where they're not, they're not offering a buyer agent commission? I do have to get paid. I have to have compensation for the work I'm doing, just like you when you go to your job. Let's talk about how that's going to work. All those things we just talked about, Mr. and Ms. Seller, now you're the buyer and you're in the same boat. What do you want to do? It doesn't really change. Again, it is, as it always has been, negotiable. This does not change. My opinion is this is a lot of people, a lot of money making decisions that is not going to have the intended effect as the media is talking about. It's kind of like the foxes looking at the chickens and saying, your coop and your fence looks a little bit run down. Let's just take it down. It's fine. And the chicken and it's like, well, wait a minute. How are we going to be protected? And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. You can do it yourselves. Now, I've known some pretty talented chickens, but I've never seen one build a coop and a fence yet. We cannot tell you what to do. As always, commission is negotiable. Buyers have always had the right to hire their own representation. Sellers have always had the right to negotiate the commission percentages, what it offers, what the services are being offered for a percentage of the commission of the sale of the home or a flat fee. None of this has changed. This is all as it always has been. What changes is the paperwork. Our listing paperwork is going to change. Our purchase paperwork is going to change. And of course, now that the buyer's agency representation form is now required by law. And again, no longer will the BAC be on the MLS. Will it still be there? In many cases, yes. It's just going to be disclosed differently. In some cases, no, it won't. In which case, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we're going to have those conversations. So for my buyers who are worried about buying a home later this summer, don't be. We'll work it out. We'll figure it out. I have been a first-time home buyer. I know how hard that is. It is a tough, tough time right now. And we get it. Again, the economy on paper looks great, but we know so many people who are struggling. And buying your first home, any home, buying and selling is such a huge thing. And there's so many emotions tied into this. And me, as well as many of my fellow realtors, we are honored and feel it a privilege that you hire us to help you during this time. None of that's going to change. Again, we are a customer service industry. Real estate's not about sales. It's not about houses. It's about relationships and the customer services and the services we're offering. And we want you, after you to get keys, to continue to call us with questions. We are here for you. None of that's going to change. Okay? We'll get through this. In the meantime, as always, as most of us do when we watch TV and the news and everything else, you take everything with a grain of salt. And we'll see what happens. But it's going to be okay. We'll get through this. We're still here. We're still going to help. No one's going to leave anybody high and dry. Until next time, from my kitchen, but without a kitty right now, I'll talk to you a little bit. Have a good one.